Lions Rock Productions.
This is Popping the Bubble with hosts Sandra Ponce de Leon and Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Kevin Smith, CEO of The Vault. We're here at The Vault, and you're listening to Popping the Bubble.
Hey, Kevin. So great to be here at The Vault. Thanks for having us and hosting us today. For our listeners, The Vault is a collaborative workspace and innovation hub based in the heart of Silicon Valley. The Vault celebrates entrepreneurs and innovators from around the world and provides them with the right tools and support to grow better and faster. Did I get that right?
That sounds pretty good. You can tell we spent a lot of time thinking about this, how to describe ourselves, because we've evolved since we started 4 years ago now.
How have you evolved?
We started as an experiment. Our original idea was to create a better place for startups to grow and develop, kind of a combination of an accelerator and a workspace, but with heavy emphasis on the design, on the interplay, the results of good design, how that develops a more collaborative community, and how to get the right mix of people in order to really be something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And then because we always thought, even from the very beginning, that a growing community has to focus a lot on learning and development. And so in our second year, we rolled out a really robust events program. We now do something like 350 events per year.
Wow.
Have 25, 30,000 people a year into various events. And they're events all focused on technology, startups, or innovation, from all kinds of events, everything from purely social kinds of events. We do a monthly founders happy hour and invite founders from anywhere. Anybody who happens to be in San Francisco that night is welcome to join. Then we also do buy invite only events for investors in startups, for founders. We do meetups, workshops, seminars, classes, and so on. This year, we've started rolling out a lot of innovation programs. We just brought in the former head of Autodesk's innovation strategy team to really roll out innovation programming, focused particularly on corporations and organizations, not always corporations, but organizations. So we've got a lot of workshops and presentations and even boot camps signed up with universities and corporations from around the world. And then also this year, we've launched what we call the Vault Launchpad program, focusing on helping startups from other markets scale into the United States.
Wow.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's amazing.
Wow. It's like you're like a Home Depot almost for like startups. Like, I need some of this.
Definitely.
Right. You can do it. We can help.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. See, the plan worked out well.
So is the idea to connect startups and companies, corporates, I guess, is what we call them, to help corporations better innovate, or vice versa? Or is it just a flow of ideas between the two types of...
Well, that's a really great question. And it's a question to which I think very few people have an answer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things we've observed over the years, and I've worked in some of the largest corporations in the world. I've worked with large corporations. I've seen how corporations or any large organization attempts to innovate.
Yep.
I've seen that it's incredibly difficult because of structural limitations that are both in design of an organization, as well as the hierarchy, as well as the financing, budgeting process, and the culture are all limiting factors.
Yep.
Not long after we started the Vault, we started getting a stream of requests from various corporations to know if they could come. They had a group of executives in from Tokyo. Could we come visit the Vault? And we used to say yes to that all the time.
For being, this, because where you're located, the types of startups that you have come through here, it's really has developed a reputation for being that sort of heart and the beating pulse of Silicon Valley innovation, right?
It's really different from what people expect, I think, when they come here. Or maybe it matches what the kind of fantasy of what Silicon Valley is.
Yep.
But people walk in the door and they go, wow. And then we take them farther back in and they go, wow. And I used to say, hey, I like this place too, but wow, I mean, where does the wow come from? And I think a lot of it comes from this the sense that this is so different from where I work back in my large cubicle farm in Manhattan or wherever, that I feel like I've just sort of discovered something. And so we had a lot of companies coming in, wanting to do, sort of a tour, see what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it. And I realized after a while that this was just tourism, and people would come in, take lots of pictures, and go back to their to the office on Monday morning, and I realized that in a way, doing these kinds of just simple Silicon Valley tours is probably ultimately detrimental, because you get a glimpse of something. It's really cool. It's interesting. It's so different from the way you experience development and work in general. And then you go back to to your office on Monday morning, you realize that nothing's changed. You're in the same old. You have no ability to make anything different happen. And that's a little bit depressing.
Or
right?
Even if you did, you wouldn't know how necessarily.
You wouldn't know where to go.
Because just a walkthrough doesn't give you enough.
Right. So we stopped doing that for a while, but we started saying, no, you can't just come take pictures of
it's
not
a safari.
Startups in their native habitats, right? Yeah, exactly. So
you should have a pith hat when you do that.
We should.
And one of these whacking sticks. I'm whacking.
I like the whacking stick. I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
So we kept thinking about how could we do this, and we explored, because I think large organizations have a fundamental problem that they aren't moving nearly as fast as the world around them is moving. They recognize that they don't know what to do. What does this mean for us? And how do we right the ship and sort of pick up the pace? At the same time, startups, no matter how much you may be focused on disrupting an industry, you still need the existing players, right? They're the ones who've got the money. They've got the distribution capabilities. They've got the marketing and the branding that you need to find a way to tap into.
Yeah.
So
and the partnership opportunities as well.
Incredibly important. And so we started thinking about how can we bridge those worlds in a way that's useful for both. And I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder for a lot of organizations, sometimes accelerators, sometimes or incubators, sometimes co-working places, but that ostensibly are created for the benefit of startups. What startups don't realize is that they're actually the product that is being sold. And a lot of these kinds of places are really set up for the benefit of corporations that can come in and sort of find technology, take technology, buy technology, whatever. So thinking about how that process ought to work took us some time.
Right.
And along the way, we encountered some really interesting work being done at Autodesk in their Innovation Genome Project, where they've taken about 10 years and a few dozen graduate students from Berkeley, Halton, and Oxford to research the last 3.5 million years of human innovation across every sphere.
Wow. And
the goal was pulling out commonalities among different kinds of innovations and creating an innovation genome. And then being able to take that and say, what are techniques that we can extract or processes that we can develop that we can implement so we can teach people how to purposefully innovate.
Right.
And moreover, how to implement a more innovation-focused culture, how to measure innovation, how do we determine what the ROI on innovation is, and so on. So
this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. Having come out of the innovation space, I worked for a company called Bright Idea that was actually trying to achieve the same thing and is achieving the same thing actually, but with software and with a measured SaaS approach to be able to crowdsource ideas and take them through an innovation pipeline to an ultimate product. It's interesting the approach that you're taking, and I mean, there's really so many types of innovation. You think of or names for innovation, disruptive innovation, Six Sigma. I mean, there's a ton. So is this innovation genome? Is there a type of innovation? Is it just it's the innovation genome and we take our lessons from what's worked in the past and apply them to the future?
Yeah. That's a good question too. I think there's so much bullshit that surrounds this word. I wish we could not use the word because
you are good at saying I'm not going to use that word anymore. Right? Yeah. Innovation has been used so much; it is hard to understand what it means.
I don't even know what it means. Most people don't even know what it means.
And
it's just a buzzword.
Well. Yeah.
Everybody's on the damn bleeding edge or the leading edge, depending on who you're talking to, and you're like, how about everybody else?
And we're all laser focused, right?
Laser focused. Yes. Yeah.
And these phrases become so trite, but I don't have I haven't come up with a better word. But a word that Bill, who led this project at Autodesk, did coin that I think is really perfect and helps describe the way we think about innovation, the way we think anybody ought to think about innovation. And it was when he described this word to me that I knew, and this was within 5 minutes of meeting him. We literally bumped into each other in a hallway and started talking. I knew that I needed to find a way to work with this guy. The word is IBNU. And it stands for interesting but not useful. And for Bill, and I think for anybody who's been involved in large corporations or in consulting groups, IBNU, it describes so much of the activity in the world or in universities, right? It's interesting, but so what? What do you do with it? So
Wait, hold on. Before you go past that, one of the ways I see these things too, like buzzwords, like we talk ecosystem, culture, and I see the sort of as like it's shorthand for part of the conversation we're not going to have. But if we want, we can open that culture jar up and dig in and pull out and understand the specific context to this. So like you say, innovation, and I'm like, great, we don't have to talk about that anymore. We can go on to the next part of the conversation. But if I don't know, now it's not just like interesting but not useful. Now we can go into that. What kind of innovation are we talking about? Are we talking about disrupting giant companies or, whatever it's going to be? That ability to slow down and grab context, it's okay to compartmentalize some of that stuff, don't you think? Or is the conversation better served by finding better words to describe things?
Well, I think you're spot on that it does become shorthand.
Right.
At the same time, it's hard to have a meaningful conversation until you've defined your terms appropriately,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
So that we both know that we're talking about the same thing.
Right.
What you think of as innovation may not be what I think of innovation or Sandra thinks of as innovation, and we may be talking around in circles, all thinking that we have a common understanding when we don't.
We had a conversation with Yumi a second ago, and she talked about diversity. But you have to define what diversity is, right? Because diversity is the antonym of unity. Well, now we're saying unity's bad. Like what are we talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Keep going. Sorry.
So one of the definitions of innovation that we use, or a part of it, is that it is has a meaningful effect in the real world. Okay. It's got to produce a result, right? It can't be IBNU.
Right.
It really has to be something that we're doing differently that is producing a positive result, and then is actually it's not just a laboratory idea, right? It's got to be something that. So you might argue, for instance, that Xerox's invention of the mouse was IBNU. Certainly, Xerox thought it was IBNU.
Right.
I mean, it never left the lab until Steve Jobs toured Park and discovered all these things that were really cool that Xerox thought were really cool, but so what? Nobody needs it.
Yeah.
And so the graphical user interface and laser printing and the mouse and there's a very long list of things that were invented at Xerox Park in the 70s. But it took Steve Jobs seeing them to realize that there's a way of actually turning this into an innovation from something that was merely interesting but apparently not useful.
Right. Didn't Gorilla Glass sit on a shelf for like 25 years for they're like, hey, this is pretty tough stuff, and just sat there waiting to be used,
Yeah, there is some amount of serendipity, I think, there can be some amount of serendipity in innovation. Mm-hmm. A lot of really interesting products have come out of the search for something else.
Yeah.
And realizing that hey, this thing that we're working on actually solves another problem that we never even thought about, and that's one example. I think Post-it notes, are another kind of famous example.
I want to ask you about bias in startups, because it's a happy, perfect world and everything's going to go our way. And then you find out, I don't know, you're Uber and you have a real problem with your central core values as a company, right? Like, these things happen. And young companies, the disadvantage they have is they are prone to make the same mistakes that IBM already made 50 years ago. You can't have alcohol in the workplace openly. It's just not going to work out over the long term. We've proven that over and over again. What are the kind of things that you help create to remove some of that bias that could be dangerous and in a bad way disruptive to these new companies? Because surely that exists. We have young people that are charge, go forward. They must need some kind of mentoring in that regard.
It seems to me there are at least 7 questions in that question. So now I get to choose which one to respond to first.
Get in where you fit in.
I think you're absolutely right that we've discovered, maybe it wasn't a discovery for everyone, but I think people who are in the startup world have recently discovered that there's a giant problem that we weren't sure existed.
Right.
At least not as pervasively as it seems to be. I think there are a lot of reasons for it. Silicon Valley really has grown up as a very homogeneous place, very bounded by the San Francisco Peninsula. The relationships, and because it's a very relationship-driven place, the relationships have always centered on Stanford, even though, interestingly enough, a majority of venture partners, for instance, have no connection, no school connection to Stanford. But still, it's really focused on Stanford, and therefore the neighborhoods that surround Stanford. And for a long time, it's been really important. If you wanted to break into Silicon Valley, you really needed to be living in Menlo Park or Mountain View or Palo Alto or God forbid, Woodside if you could afford it.
Mm-hmm.
And
like Palo Alto's cheap.
Exactly. And you need to be sending your kids to the same schools that investors and senior tech people were sending their kids to schools and so on. I think one of the greatest things to happen to Silicon Valley as a concept, as well as a kind of a state of mind, and to happen to technology, to our ability to be innovators, is the transition of the capital of Silicon Valley from Palo Alto to San Francisco. So 4 years ago...
Has it been declared? Has San Francisco been declared the capital of Silicon Valley?
Oh, yeah. I determined this about 3 years ago. That there are, for the last 3 years, there are at least 3 times as many companies formed in San Francisco as in the rest of Silicon Valley combined.
Wow.
That is new. That was not the case a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And there are all kinds of reasons driving that. For one, tech companies, startups don't need massive amounts of land to build semiconductor fabs like they did 40 years ago.
Right.
So you don't have to start a company out in the pastures, right? Mm-hmm. Or the orange groves, as Silicon Valley once was.
Right.
And in fact, you can perfectly well start a great company in somebody's living room, like LinkedIn was started, right? In an apartment living room. Another thing is that I think this is a global trend, but millennials, and to a growing extent other generations too, really don't want to live and work in suburbs. They want to be in denser urban areas, surrounded by other creative, interesting people who are doing creative, interesting things, and surrounded by lots of amenities that make it easy to get there.
Yep.
What's the first point geographically if you were to go out east, obviously not west, but north, east, and south when that stops being the case? Is it Tonopah, Nevada? Is it Colorado? Where do you think that stops being where? Because not all millennials want to live and work in super expensive San Francisco, for example.
Doesn't always mean super expensive San Francisco.
Sure.
We see the same trend happening in Des Moines and Oklahoma City and Kansas City, right, where people are moving into the urban cores, into the center of cities, and declaring that this is where they're going to stay. Geez, I find people older, my generation, and to some extent younger, my kids' generation, saying the same things. Like,
Right.
The suburbs are boring. Why do we want to stay there? I mean, and you see more and more people retiring and moving from their suburban house where they raise their kids into an apartment in the city because there's a lot more
Yeah,
to
it
do.
just makes sense. It's the center of culture and activity and great food. So why wouldn't you want to live here? It makes sense.
Why wouldn't
that, yeah.
So
yeah, San
I think
Francisco.
that's one of the drivers for pushing startups more into San Francisco. Others are purely kind of from an urban design point of view for this city at least. There was this giant area of the city that just emptied out after the dot-com crash, right?
Yeah.
And there was all of this space that was available and
Yeah, you're right.
at the time relatively cheaply, right? In 2002, 3, 4, 5, and south of Market. So for several reasons, I think that the locus of Silicon Valley has now become San Francisco. This time, though, I don't think it's changing. In fact, I'm not sure that has ever been the center of technology, but it is now. And it's become such an important place, tapping into other trends, driving people into large cities. And you've got major companies like Salesforce that have put down really deep and a lot of really thick roots in this city. They're not going away. Even in the next downturn, they're not moving to Palo Alto, right? So I think we've crossed a new bridge, and San Francisco now is the capital of Silicon Valley. But that's a good thing because Silicon Valley, as we understood it before, it was all male, almost all white, and really heavily hierarchical based on whether or not you went to Stanford.
Yeah.
Right? Breaking those stereotypes is a good thing. You talked about diversity earlier. There's a lot of data showing the importance of getting multiple skill sets, different kinds of skill sets, multiple experience sets brought together to focus on particular problems and the effectiveness and productivity that results from that.
You're making Ayn Rand mad.
This is what we get. She's dead, so it doesn't matter. This is what we get from, I think part of what we get from moving Silicon Valley into San Francisco. It's a much more diverse place, and it has room for and welcomes different kinds of people, different kinds of diversity, and relationships are different here than they were in Palo Alto and Menlo Park.
So, yeah, I mean, I love that. And, okay, San Francisco is now the heart of Silicon Valley officially. So how are you taking that into what you're doing with the Vault? And, what are some of the lessons? You talked about diversity. Is that something that you're also imparting upon the startups or the corporations that are coming through here through some of your programs? How are you applying some of those lessons?
We do a lot of programs, maybe not as many as we should, but a lot of things focused on women in tech, female founders. We do some things related to bringing in other groups, say universities that aren't Stanford, for that matter.
Yeah.
Interesting things are happening all over the world in universities that haven't been typically known for being the bellwethers of innovation in locations that have not ever been known as the next Silicon Valley, right?
The pedigree.
But interesting things are happening all over the world. One of the areas that I find really fascinating over the past 3 or maybe 5 years is the African continent. One of the, I think, dings on Silicon Valley, and I still think this is an extraordinary place in terms of leadership and innovation and change and what we collectively do here. But one of the dings is that Silicon Valley is really good at solving first world problems.
Yes.
And sometimes you find that more interesting things are happening with far fewer resources, and maybe precisely because there are far fewer resources in places like Africa, where people are using technology to solve sometimes life or death problems, and in creative ways. And so what we really think of the Vault is a global network. Almost like a hub and spoke kind of system, and our goal is to be able to link innovation ecosystems all over the world back into Silicon Valley, so that we can both bring more ideas, viewpoints, skill sets, experiences into Silicon Valley and take from Silicon Valley what we know works and bring it out to kind of spread the resources around the world.
So a symbiotic relationship is what you're talking about. And I hate that.
Yes.
Yes. No, but yes, it's a flow of ideas globally and out of Silicon Valley. That's really exciting. And you do have locations globally, right?
We're starting to. We've opened a new location in Korea, which is one of those places. 3 years ago, you didn't see Korea or Seoul listed on top 20 tech hotspots in the world. There's a lot of there's some fantastic universities.
Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, co-host of Popping the Bubble. This episode is sponsored by us over here at Lions Rock Productions. What do we do? Content management strategy. We'll help you create podcasts, develop strategies, consult on what you've got. If you want to take a look at content, we would love to have an opportunity to do that for you. Now let's get back to Popping the Bubble.
It's a very hardworking, focused population, and technology and startups and innovation in general are really a kind of a national focus. So I think there are a lot of really interesting things coming out of Korea. We're in the pipeline of several locations in Europe, all not what you might think of. If you think of what's the hottest tech city in Europe, people would probably say London. Maybe they would say Berlin. From our point of view, there's a lot going on in those cities. There's also a loud amount of attendant noise in those cities. There are other cities that, at least per capita, are producing a lot more interesting technology.
Yeah.
The Nordics, all of the Nordics, including the Baltics, is one example. Per capita, they produce more startups than any region in the world. Per capita, they produce more unicorns than any region in the world.
Really?
So clearly, they're doing something really right, and yet probably haven't drawn enough attention, to Helsinki, Stockholm, Oslo, Tallinn, Riga, and so on, and Copenhagen as those cities and those countries deserve. So
It made me feel like I need a jacket after talking about all those places. It's cold up there right now.
actually, today it was warmer in Oslo than San Francisco.
Oh,
so,
well, San Francisco
I know,
makes me want to put a jacket
You're basically
on too.
right, but
Yeah.
it's not that much different from San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
This is. Is this
thinking-
the coldest city you've ever been to in the summer?
Gosh, of course. Snowy Valley.
It's warmer in Anchorage, right?
Yeah, no, totally. I was thinking about the capital of Silicon Valley being San Francisco, and you guys are neighbors with where Tecumseh Sherman opened up his bank.
That's right.
And he similarly said, the moment they changed the name to San Francisco, they changed, what this place was going to be. Like, it was going to be the capital of this area. And yeah, Sacramento is the capital of California and all that. But let's be honest, San Francisco is the premier hub of at least the northern portion of the state. And that's just always been true, just for 150 plus years.
Yeah.
And so why wouldn't it be the place where you have the Silicon Valley resources? This is the place. Your neighbor says so 150 years ago, and now here you are saying the same thing.
Yeah, it was funny. We looked at like 12 or 14 buildings on our first day when we were thinking about opening up the vault, and we had a pretty clear idea of what the building and the space should look like. And so we saw some crap, the 80s style cubicle things that give you goosebumps when you walk in, and we couldn't run out fast enough from. But we also saw some interesting buildings. This was, to our mind, by far the most interesting.
Yeah, we should sort
in
of
the most interesting
paint
region.
a picture of the vault for our listeners, because right now, one thing that's actually very unique, that we happen to be sitting in a soundproof room, which I don't know what these things are called, but
This is called soundproofing.
soundproofing. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not the typical thing that you would find in an office environment, and we are below ground as well, with some exposed brick and beams. So it's definitely not a standard office building per se, and you get that feel when you walk in here.
Yeah, environment matters a lot.
For sure.
It matters enormously in people's productivity, in their happiness, and even in the amount of time they spend in place. And when we walked into this building, and I kind of knew this neighborhood. This is the oldest commercial district of San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's the only commercial district that survived the fire in 1906. Everything else burned down.
Wow.
And the reason it survived the fire told us that there's a spirit here that is just right. In 1906, when fire on the second day of fires in San Francisco, the Army Corps of Engineers came to the street to set a fire break, right? And they were going to light all these buildings on fire. And got here, discovered that this was the site of the West Coast's biggest whiskey warehouse. So instead of lighting the buildings on fire, they ran fire hoses over from the bay to save the whiskey.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's why this region, this building was
Amazing.
built in 1854. All the buildings around here were built in the middle 1850s, 60s, 70s. It's the only part of San Francisco that looks like this, and that was an important part of being here. But my reservation was, I mean, at the time when we opened up 4 years ago, this was all antique stores, art
Right.
galleries, design studios, bookshops.
Yeah.
And my fear was, would startups cross Market Street?
Oh,
Right,
yeah.
So as it turned out, and of course, if you walk around, you see this is a tech neighborhood now. But the day we opened formally here, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal calling Jackson Square, this region, the new Sand Hill Road, because of all the VCs that were moving here.
Wow.
And that has continued to be true. There are dozens of VCs within a 5-minute walk.
Well, it's
It
a
really
beautiful
has become
neighborhood.
kind of a
It is
lucrative-
nice.
Right
there.
at the base of the Transamerica Pyramid, so it's quite lovely, and all the buildings are really lovely and quaint too.
Do you identify with like someone like Sherman who comes here and he's like, I'm leaving the Army, but I'm coming back to San Francisco. Do you identify with that kind of spirit? Like, do you think, like, does that create cachet with you at all?
We think more about the first tenant in this building.
Okay.
We discovered, doing some research after we'd moved in, that the first tenant in this building was Domingo Ghirardelli. And when
Ghirardelli
this
chocolates.
building opened,
Yes.
he made chocolate down in the basement, had a retail store on the ground floor, and his family lived upstairs. And so we've sort of thought from the very beginning, this was the site of entrepreneurship. In fact, a company that has endured coming up on 200 years.
Yeah,
And,
which in America
one
is
of
a
the
pretty big
oldest-
deal.
One of the oldest companies in
Yeah.
the world, actually, right?
Wow.
And one of the oldest products in the world, and some aspects of that are still used today in making chocolate were discovered in this building by people at the Ghirardelli Chocolate Company then. So
Yeah.
we kind of draw on that spirit.
For
Wow.
sure.
So, talking about some of the innovation programs and the startups that have come through here, you've obviously done a lot of work to finesse those programs to really get at the core and center of what creates a successful startup, and you've actually had some successes that have come out of this space. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, after 3 years in, we haven't completed fourth year, but 3 years in, on average, companies came in here with 2.6 people, and on average,
Yep.
left here about 15 months later with 12.4 people. So about 5x growth.
Yeah.
Over the course of a little over a year.
So that means they have
15
funding
months.
to hire the people as well.
And on average, every company has completed a round and been in the midst of another round when they moved into their own space. And that's, we had some expectations around how this would play out. That's about what we expected. The goal is that you bring companies in, they're able to grow, launch product, develop, raise funding, and if you do your job right, if we do our jobs right, they'll grow up and move out, right? It's like raising kids, and grow up and onto their own. Overall, I think we've tallied about $1.5 billion in capital that has gone through companies based in the vault
Wow.
since we started. Now, the majority of that was acquisition consideration. 3 companies were acquired for what I consider large amounts of capital. Another one IPO'd while it was here, and another one is in the IPO pipeline this year.
Wow.
So we think that this is this is the way it should work.
Yeah, whatever you're doing is working.
We don't have we're not like an accelerator program, a formal accelerator program where we bring a company in and it's a 30 or a 3-month sprint to demo day and then we boot you out.
Right.
Companies grow at or should grow at different paces. I think one of the downsides of kind of Silicon Valley culture over the years has been this mantra that growth is everything.
Right.
And it's always foot to the accelerator, flooring it a nonstop. That's right in a lot of cases. I don't think that's right for every company, and it's certainly not right for every market. And I think some of the downsides we have seen, and you named Uber and some others in the past, come out of a result of looking for growth at all costs, literally at all costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole concept, just the whole thing of grow, get out and go do it. I've talked to a number of people that have been through startups, and sort of the general vibe is great. You've put me in a position where I can pitch myself as a basketball player of the future, but I'm 4 years old, and nobody believes in that yet, So yeah, I might be the greatest basketball player ever in 15 years, but right now, they struggle to make that leap. Like it's still too soon, and putting all of those pieces together, it's hard. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to look at someone who's 22 years old and like, I've got the next best idea. I need $5 million of your dollars, and you're like, there are so many lessons that you have to learn over the next 15 years, For
sure. Yeah.
And it's not just growth. Yeah. Like I need to know that we're not going to all get sued because you can't keep your hands off of somebody.
Yeah.
Legitimately,
That's right.
Yeah.
I think that's another of the downside of the sort of the dark side of Silicon Valley has been that we let evangelical leaders recently said about President Trump, he gets a mulligan. I think there's been that attitude in Silicon Valley that if you're growing at the speed that we want you to grow, it doesn't matter what else you're doing, right? We're closing our eyes to everything else because growth is all that matters.
Right.
And, in some ways, that's coming home to roost a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that the ramifications has been as extreme as merited. For instance, the founder of Theraflu was recently sanctioned by the SEC. Had to pay a $500,000 fine. She's banned from
Theranos.
You said Theraflu. Sorry, I meant Theranos.
I was like, I'm like, wait, them too?
The founder of Theranos.
Theranos. Yes.
Yeah.
What's her name again?
She's scammed. Man, I don't want to say her name.
Is her name Elizabeth?
Elizabeth Holmes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
If I look at this and I say, look, here's a chance to, if I break a few rules, I might have a chance to make billions of dollars and create a multi-billion-dollar company. Now, the risk is that I get caught and it's going to cost me $500,000 and I won't be able to sell securities for 10 years.
Yeah.
Geez. Is the risk great enough?
Some people will.
I'm saying
apparently.
that plenty of people
do.
Looking at that purely rationally in Rondian terms would say absolutely that's a risk we should take.
There's a lot of questionable ethics that happens when you're under that kind of pressure, and you also are surrounded by the successes that we see continuously.
Absolutely.
Unicorns. Yeah.
So I think penalties for that kind of behavior need to be a lot greater in order to forestall it from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the lessons? I mean, you're an entrepreneur yourself. What are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way that you're embedding into the culture here at the Vault?
Well, I'll tell you something I've learned recently. Maybe I've learned it more than once. It's just sort of something that's been on my mind recently. Years ago, I worked in a consulting firm, and it happened to be in Eastern Europe. And it happened that most of our clients were American or European companies that had come into Eastern Europe following the fall of the wall. And I found that a really common problem was these companies grew too fast. And there was this pattern of unbridled growth, kind of through no fault of their own. So that when things went wrong, they had no clue why or what to do about it because they really didn't know how they got where they were in the first place. So I came into this business thinking that really fast growth can be more dangerous than than slow growth. I still think that's true, but I've also discovered that a better way to think about this is in thinking of in terms of momentum. That running coaches used to say, in every minute, you are either getting better or you're getting worse. You're never staying exactly the same.
Right.
And I think that's true for startups as well. Every day we're either moving ahead or we're moving backwards. And it's important not to be going backwards because that picks up its own sort of momentum that's hard to reverse. Yeah. You got to make sure that you're constantly growing, that you're moving ahead in the right direction while still not getting out of control. But making sure that you're always gearing up.
Well, certain things have a pace. Frenetic growth is frenetic.
Frenetic,
and
exactly.
Yeah, and that's great, except for culture doesn't tolerate design.
Right.
Culture happens at a leisurely thing, and if you're going to do culture well, you have to walk.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can't look at culture if you're running so fast, with your hair on fire, like going that direction towards growth, while everybody else is like, hey, while you're doing that, you don't care about me, so I'm going to go do, all of a sudden your company starts to fracture.
Yeah.
And it can become really invisible, where you don't even see it because you're growing. You're like, everything's working. Meanwhile, you got this cancer.
Right.
It's
Don't see the
crazy.
forest for the trees.
Yeah.
On that note, is there anything else that you wanted to end with, Kevin, that we perhaps didn't get a chance to cover?
I think the kind of thing you're doing is really interesting. I think it's important to talk about the things that Silicon Valley does well, the things that Silicon Valley doesn't do well, the things that other places do well that don't do well. One of the I think most interesting things that this 200-year American experiment has produced is the realization, maybe not as pervasive through the population as it ought to be, but certainly in analyses and data, the realization that we have become a much greater place by virtue of taking in people from all over the world, all kinds of experiences, all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of data points and learnings and knowledge that vary. And in some ways, this all kind of focuses in on California and even San Francisco.
Yeah.
And I think for Silicon Valley and for San Francisco to continue, and for the United States to continue to hold a leading position in all areas of human achievement, we've got to continue bringing in and assembling more people. The melting pot is one of the greatest inventions of human history.
Yeah, absolutely.
100% right.
Well, it's been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for hosting us here in your beautiful space and for talking to us about what you're doing. It's fascinating, and we love it.
You guys can find out more about them at SF Vault on Twitter. Of course, you can find out about Sandra at Sandramp on Twitter.
Yep.
I'm at P. Turner and at Popping the Bubble with no E on the end of bubble. We will talk to you. This is a great conversation. I would love to keep going. We're on a super tight schedule because Sandra's a taskmaster.
A little bit, yes. Thanks, Kevin.
Excellent. Thank you much.